Hello and welcome to another episode of Out of Spec Reviews. Some people have been saying, Dave, we want to see more of you. And I'm a little surprised, but I said, all right, well, let me think, what can I do? What can I do to add value? And now I put up a couple of videos recently over on the Out of Spec Motoring channel. One was taking this beautiful, where is this? Look at this, the IONIQ 5 right behind me there, from Connecticut all the way down to Florida. And then literally the other day, I released a video of the return trip coming back from Connecticut or from Florida to Connecticut. And, there's been an ongoing debate that I've been hearing and some of the comments about, hey, is it better to have a car that has more range or one that charges fast? And I've thought about this a lot and I've said to myself, you know what? I have the answer. The answer is yes. You want to have a car that has awesome range and awesome charging, especially if you live off in the sticks and you really are far away from, from a level 3 or a DC. I guess there is no such thing as level 3, but, a DC fast charging or the infrastructure is fine. It's important to have range. But when you've got either Tesla's already proven this, right? With all the supercharger network everywhere, people don't even think about charging or, road tripping a Tesla. It's so easy. It's not even fun. It just works, right? So, one of the things I was thinking about with the new CCS infrastructure, really what does it come down to? Which is more important? And that's what we're going to explore today, because the answer is not that simple. And so let's get into it and let's have a little bit of fun. Back in December, I took a road trip in my Volkswagen ID.4. This was an all-wheel drive version of the ID.4 with the 19-inch wheels. Great car, super comfortable car, massaging seats. It had adaptive cruise. It didn't have the lane changing or anything like that. No heads-up display, but you sat down nice and low in the car, and it was a great road tripper, very comfortable. And what I would say is that if all you were going to do was use that car, if all I was going to do was use that car for around town, I mean, it has basically 200 miles of range, let's be honest. I mean, the EPA rating might say it's 240, 245, something like that. But, cold weather, how fast you drive it, just say you can pretty much count on 200 miles of range in that car. My commute is 6 miles one way every day. All right. So 12 miles round trip. I can plug into a 110. And, honestly, it doesn't really matter about the charging speed or the range for an ID.4. It's a great car. I mean, literally, if you've got a 75-mile range to get to work one way, and you can charge it home, put in a level 2 charger, J1772, plug in just like you plug your cell phone every night, plug your car in every night. That's all you need. But for me, because we have this place down in Florida, I was really kind of looking at this IONIQ over here. And the honest truth is, I mean, it looks pretty sweet there, especially in this shooting star matte finish paint. But when I first saw it, I didn't really like it. And I said, the IONIQ 5, it kind of looks a little strange to me. It looks a little, maybe not for my demographic. I know I'm about to use my glasses. You'll see when I start going over the numbers here, because I got a lot of data to show you about comparing what is it like to do an ID.4 road trip down to Florida versus an IONIQ 5 road trip down to Florida, which I think you're going to find very interesting. But, my thought was, I don't really like the look. But then I started to look at the numbers and the technology, and everyone talks about this 800-volt system. I don't really understand what that means. Maybe Kyle does. Maybe a lot of you do. I know this channel has a lot of very smart people that are tending to be geeky, nerdy, and proud of it. I like to think of myself a little bit like that, but again, I don't really understand 800-volt versus 400-volt, except for the fact, one thing I did understand about this car: it charges way faster than the ID.4. And so this was one of the things that I really wanted to take a look at. And after I drove the car, I actually drove it in a rear wheel drive version of an SE with cloth seats. Thing was under 40 grand. I think they've raised the price a little bit, but great car. I was ready to buy one, and then the deal fell through, and I ended up finding an all-wheel drive. IONIQ 5, and I'm very happy with it. And I kind of want to share with you today why I'm happy with it. And it's all about the data. It's about the numbers. It's about road tripping. But again, if you're going to be daily driving this car, you want to get an extra car, I would say that style-wise, whether it's an EV6 or it's an IONIQ 5 or an ID.4, they're great. All of them are great. Let's not kid ourselves about this. So, the IONIQ 5 does have some additional things, especially the limited. And it has the heads-up display. It's got this fancy seat that I didn't think I would use. I'm 6'5", and when I first sat in the car, I really didn't sit that low, and I like to sit down low in a car. And I wasn't really all that happy with the IONIQ 5 from a ergonomic standpoint, but there were things that bugged me about the ID.4. For example, if like in the wintertime, you want to go out to your car and you want it to be warm. So you get on the app and you warm up your car. The thing worked like less than half the time. I just don't understand what was going on with that. For the IONIQ 5, now that I own, works every time, like a charm. The ID.4, again, it didn't have lane changing. I think I mentioned that before. But even with the adaptive cruise, I was finding that, especially in windy conditions, I don't know if any of you have found this. Please comment if you have. But when you're in windy conditions, it felt like it was kind of like going and hesitating as it was going down the road. And when I drove the SE IONIQ 5 with HDA, not HDA2, which lane change and scooch and all that fancy stuff, I felt like it was really smooth. And I was really happy with that. Now, the ID.4 that I had, the most recent one that I'm going to be comparing the data to today, that was not the Mac Daddy one with the 20-inch wheels. It was the 19-inch wheels. It was a little bit softer, cushy ride. It wasn't all-wheel drive. And again, substantial difference in performance between an ID.4 all-wheel drive versus an ID.4 rear-wheel drive. I own two of the rear-wheel drives before the all-wheel drive. I should never have gone to drive the all-wheel drive ID.4 because it's a big difference in terms of speed. Whereas I think I might have mentioned this in the past, but the IONIQ 5, the rear-wheel drive IONIQ 5, that thing motors. I mean, it's really pretty good. So I guess there were a few other things about the ID.4 that I didn't like. No plug and charge. Well, guess what? This one back here, it doesn't have plug and charge either, the IONIQ 5. No battery preconditioning. So you in the wintertime, right now, no one thinks about it, at least here in the Northeast, right? Because it's warm out. But when you pull in to an EA station, even if you're just, charging locally, I mean, my ID.4 came with 3 years free EA. This IONIQ 5 came with 2 years free EA. By the way, those sessions of 30 minutes, all you got to do is unplug and replug in, and you don't get charged. So don't sit there on the hook if you're looking to charge to a higher state of charge. Just a little sneak tidbit for you right there. But neither one of these cars has battery preconditioning. What does that mean? That means that if you pull in to an EA station and your battery pack is, let's say, 15 degrees Celsius or colder than that, this thing, even though this car is a charging animal behind us here, this they'll charge up to 240 kilowatts versus the ID.4, which will charge maximum about 132, 133, I think is the most I've ever seen. If these battery packs are cold, they only pull like 60 to 65 kilowatts. That's it. So I'm hoping, there's big rumors that the IONIQ 5 is going to offer preconditioning even on a 2022. I know the GV60s that are coming out right now, they're actually 2023 models. They are being delivered with battery preconditioning based on the navigation and destination in the cars. But let's hope that through a over-the-air software update, the IONIQ 5 will have battery preconditioning. The other thing that this car, the IONIQ 5, does have over the ID.4, which I really like, is single one-pedal driving. And the modes that you have with the IONIQ 5 in terms of the regenerative braking are just phenomenal. You've got no regen 0, a little regen 1, a little more regen 2, a little more regen 3. Then you've got something called I pedal, which is great. I love that. stop and go traffic and all of that. And then there's something called auto, which allows the car to kind of coast on the highway, but if it starts creeping up on another car in front of it, it actually interactively will slow down, as long as whatever the traffic is doing. So the sophistication of the regenerative braking on the IONIQ 5 or any EGMP platform car for that matter is far superior to the ID.4. But again, why did I sell the ID.4? I think there were a lot of these reasons that I was thinking about, but it really came down to the charging. Now I want to share my screen here. Hopefully this will work with all of you, and hopefully you can kind of see this. But what I've done is I recently took 3 trips. One in the, what am I doing here? Here we go. Okay, so I took a trip from Connecticut down to Florida in the ID.4, again, all-wheel drive ID.4 with 19-inch wheels. Then that was back in December, and it was a little bit chilly here when I took it down to Florida, but it wasn't crazy cold temperatures. It was one of those warm days back in December where I think it was maybe 60 degrees. And as I headed south, it got warmer and warmer and warmer. So even though it was in December, I wouldn't let that kind of skew the numbers in terms of the charging curves that you're going to see here. I haven't graphed any of this data. I apologize, but I'm going to take you through the spreadsheet. Then in April, I took my IONIQ 5 after selling my ID.4. I took that down from Connecticut to Florida. And then I also took it from Florida to Connecticut. And that video is the one that just went live. So please check it out over on Out of Spec Motoring. I had some fun. I don't know what I'm doing here. I'm making these videos. I'm having a good time. This is not what I do for a living. I'm just trying to share my fun with all of you, and you seemingly are liking what I'm doing. So I really appreciate that. I want to thank you for that. But what I wanted to do was to kind of compare these trips. Now, the reason why I don't have the data from my return trip coming back from Florida to Connecticut in the ID.4 is that over the holidays, Electrify America, they had, some of you may remember in the CCS charging network, they actually they gave away free electricity for a period of, I think, 2 weeks. And so one interesting tidbit about that is that even though I was using the EA app to authenticate or to start the charging session on the ID.4, I never got emails back from Electrify America with all the data. And that's where I get all this data from. Is I don't really, for the most part, I don't write it down as I'm going or anything like that. When I had Teslas, I've had 5 Teslas, I used to use Teslafy all the time. Insane technology. I mean, just incredible data scraping and the ability to go back and look at the analytics and see exactly where he went down to the maps. It's incredible. If you have a Tesla and you're not using Teslafy in your road trip, I highly recommend it. But here in the CCS world, we don't have anything like that to the best of my knowledge. So in any event, bottom line here is the ID.4 from Connecticut to Florida. If you compare that to the 2 trips that I took, I wanted to compare this from a cost saving standpoint first. And one of the things that is fair point someone made recently on a comment in my video is that I put a lot of the data as to what it would have cost me had I not had free Electrify America's charging. And but since I'm not a member, this is showing the actual non-member rates. So they're a bit inflated, but at least they're inflated consistently, right? So it's not as if I have member rates for one and non-member rates for the other. And you could see that the Volkswagen over here was $191.36 to get from Connecticut down to Florida. The IONIQ 5 from Connecticut down to Florida, $170. Okay. It would have cost that had you actually not been a non-member and charged. Again, it didn't cost me anything, just tolls, right? And some fast food and what have you. But roughly speaking, it's about the same cost. to go down. The thing, though, that for me is life altering. Now, maybe life altering is maybe a stretch. I apologize for saying life altering, but a significant value proposition to me in this IONIQ 5 over the ID.4 is people will say, oh, it charges at 240 kilowatts versus 131 kilowatts, or advertised, 125 kilowatts. What does that mean? What does that actually mean in the real world of going from Connecticut down to Florida? Let me tell you what that means. The ID.4, I did 8 stops, and total charging was 6.22 hours. On the first trip down in the IONIQ 5, I did 10 stops, and some of those stops were, well, one of them was kind of a Hail Mary stop at a convenience store where I ended up using, I know, the ice machine, right? Some of you watched the ice machine video. It's funny. A lot of people were commenting, oh, Dave, you shouldn't have done that. You shouldn't have plugged in. And I will say that I did try to call the owner of the store. No one answered. There was no one around. I probably could have called the police. But as I was finishing up charging, the owner of the store did pull up, and she was super nice. She was like, wow, are you okay? Is there anything I can do? And I said, look, I just took about 1.5 kilowatt hours worth of electricity from your wall at about 10 cents a kilowatt hour. That's about 15 cents. Can I give you some money? She's like, no, don't worry about it. She says, as long as you're safe and everything's fine, that's all good. But I do understand where people were saying, you shouldn't just pull up to a wall outlet and start charging. And I agree. I think that's important. It's a little different than if you're at O'Hare and you got your cell phone, right? And you're in the airport and you want to plug in and get some juice there. That's part of the service that we would have. So anyway, enough about the ice machine for a moment. But going down with the 10 stops, it was 4.03 hours. So I saved 2 hours and 19 minutes of charging time. And coming back, actually 9 stops. And this is the video where I stopped at south of the border, and Bailey was freaking out with Pedro's pet toilet and all that. If you haven't seen it, it's kind of funny, actually. But, I saved 2.33 hours of charging over the ID.4 on a very similar trip. And so that, to me, is a significant reason why I find the value in this IONIQ 5. And I absolutely have grown to love the look of the car. People come up to me, wow, that thing's pretty cool. What is it? And all of that. But let's look at some of the data here. You can see that I put the time in seconds in terms of how long it actually took to charge. But if I sort this information here, let's just say descending on the largest, deepest charge that I did was actually in the ID.4 from 2% to 100%. I took 98% totally charged percentage of the battery pack, 3,989 seconds, non-member cost of about $34, 43 cents a kilowatt hour, which we all understand. But what I've done is I've taken the total energy that was delivered. Now, keep in mind, the ID.4 has only got a roughly 77 kilowatt hour battery pack, almost exactly the same size as what's in the IONIQ 5. So there's no difference in terms of, how large the battery pack is. When you think about kilowatts and charging speeds, as opposed to kilowatt hours, with kilowatt hours, think of that as the amount of energy that the battery can store. It's like the size of your gas tank, right? 16-gallon gas tank. I got a 77 kilowatt hour battery pack in my car. And both of these cars have the same exact size, pretty much, battery packs in them. And so then what I did was I took the total energy delivered divided by the time that it took to charge, and I calculated something that I'm calling the Out of Spec session efficiency factor. Whatever. I think I was like very tired when I created this spreadsheet, but I think more important than that, it's a number here that by itself doesn't mean anything. But when you start looking at this number, the lower that number is, the more efficient that charging session is. So let's look at this. the IONIQ 5, Florida, Connecticut, Stafford, Virginia, 10 to 84%. Now remember, Hyundai, they actually maintain, they put it in really good, simple terms. You can charge from 10 to 80% in 18 minutes with an asterisk, which means that as long as your battery is up to temperature, as long as the charging session is actually putting out, you know, the proper amount of energy that it can absorb and take in. And I believe what they're doing because I've seen the data. And I mean, look at this right here. I plugged in exactly 10%. I think that was the only time that I plugged in the entire trip at 10%. You can see here's I plugged in a lot of times at 11%, sometimes 0. Let's not talk about that. But getting back to this efficiency factor over here, if you look at the efficiency factor and you see that in this particular case went from 10 to 84%, took 74% of the battery pack, 62 kilowatt hours were delivered, and 1,278 seconds. That has the lowest number for this session efficiency factor of all of these charging sessions, which there are, how many are there? Quite a few. 28. And when you look at the max speed that I pulled, there it is, 242.71. And it's no secret that these numbers align. But what's interesting to me is that the ID.4 doesn't come into play until way down here, where I have an efficiency factor of 33.5, and you'll notice that I plugged in at 11%. Is that right? Yeah, 11% to 65%, and I took 44 kilowatt hours of energy, and that's the first time that this ID.4 even remotely competed with the IONIQ 5, and that's because you'll see that in some of these cases down here below, what I've done in the IONIQ 5 was I plugged in a higher state of charge. And we all know that when you plug in a higher state of charge, typically what happens is, it's like when you have an empty glass and you got a pitcher of lemonade. You pour the lemonade into the glass. As soon as it starts getting full, you back it off, right? And that's what happens with these batteries. The cars ask for less energy to be delivered to them through the protocols because they want to protect the battery. Basically, they taper, they slow down. A lot of you know this. For those that don't, now maybe you know, maybe you do, right? So not surprising to me, because when you look at this efficiency factor over here, first of with the 33.5 on the ID.4, you look at the next one down, the next two. These I pulled in with 36% state of charge, 42% state of charge in my IONIQ 5, and that's why the efficiency factor was higher, because it wasn't pulling as high a speed, if you will, as at least for a longer period of time. Now, the max charge speed that I see on this IONIQ 5 session here, where I pulled in at 36, was 234. But one of the things that happens with the IONIQ 5 is that as soon as it hits around 52, 53%, it starts to taper. And so I wasn't really able to stay at this super high, if you will, kilowatt max speed charge for very long, because I had pulled in at quite a high state of charge. So, you know, when you look at all these numbers here, you start to understand that the bottom line is that this IONIQ 5, for me, it just really saves me a lot of time in terms of charging, and I think that's really good. One of the interesting things also, if I sort based on, I think it was a lot of these stations didn't align up with in terms of the two trips with the ID.4 and the IONIQ 5, because I was actually unable to make it all the way down to I think it was Maryland in the ID.4. When I left my house, for some reason, there was just I couldn't make it all the way to Delaware for some reason, so I had to stop in New Jersey. One of the other things to consider here is that I'll just talk a little bit about Tesla versus the CCS network. Tesla they have built the most amazing network. Version 3s are 250. They tend to taper much quicker, at least than a 350 EA in my car. But forget about that. The locations of, for the most part, the locations of the Tesla superchargers themselves, they're so conveniently placed right off the highways. Whereas with EA, oftentimes, like there's a couple in New Jersey, if you can't make it to Delaware from Connecticut for whatever, you can't get over the bridge or get down to Maryland, and you got to stop in New Jersey. Some of these stops in New Jersey, if you're heading southbound on the New Jersey Turnpike, you actually get to get off, turn around, go on local roads, because the only EA is on the northbound side. And then in other cases, it's like 4 or 5 miles off of the highway. So when you factor that into it, we still have a long way to go with the CCS infrastructure. And I know I only talk about EA because I know there are some better units coming out, hopefully from EVgo, hopefully from ChargePoint. But for the most part, it's not just because EA is free for me. It's just because my car can now actually take advantage of the faster output of these 350s, at least until it starts to taper under. One of the other things I just want to say is I've been somewhat critical of folks that are plugging in to 350s when their cars can only absorb, or take in maybe 55, 57, or 77, or even an ID.4 that will charge at a max of 35 or 133 or something like that. And somebody made a comment to me about the fact that, hey, listen, Dave, as soon as your car tapers under 150, shouldn't you move off the 350? And I thought about it, and I go, you know what? I probably should. And the answer is that if a Taycan or a Lucid or another EGMP platform car did pull in, I absolutely would move, because that's the right thing to do. I think a lot of what's going on today, though, in the marketplace is the dealers just don't know what they're selling, and they're educating people out the door when they deliver the cars. But you know what happens when you take delivery of a car. There's so many things to keep track of. You got to remember, how do you turn the radio on? How do I unlock the car? How do I do it? You're gonna say, wait a minute, charge it a don't charge it a 350, charge it a 150. Blah blah. People just glaze over. And so I think all of us who are a little bit more experienced with charging, and I put this in my last video, let's help people, let's talk to them, let's educate them, and one at a time. I think we can start to improve some of the etiquette that's going on at the charging stations. And etiquette may be the wrong word for what I'm describing. I think a lot of people just don't understand. So anything we as a team here, right? Team geek, if you will, team nerd who really understands this, spread the news, educate, be a teacher out there in a nice way. Not everyone will listen. Some people understand this and still will park at a use an Electrify America station as a parking spot, as an example. In my last video, I saw a Mustang Mach-E doing that. Well, maybe he had, I don't know, maybe he had mechanical problems or some kind of trouble with that. Who knows? But in any event, this was an interesting one to me, because in Florence, I had 3 sessions that 2 were in the IONIQ 5 and 1 was in the ID.4. And I think this really shows it's a really great representation of you go from 0 to 83%. In this case, in 29 minutes. You'll notice that for the most part, I was at most staying at these EA stations for just around 30 minutes, because A, I didn't need to stay longer. B, I was tending to get into conversations with people, and I was probably overcharging in a lot of cases, but I had to walk the pup, Bailey. She needed to get something to eat, something to drink. Next thing I know, boom, 30 minutes is up. I'm ready to go. But you look at this ID.4 charging station or charging stop at Florence, went from 12 to 89% in 43 minutes. So here we went from 9 to 91% in 30 minutes. So there's 13 minutes of savings there, and you got more energy, right? We got 69 kilowatt hours delivered, again, into the same size battery pack, as opposed to 61. So 8 more kilowatt hours for 13 fewer minutes. And this is where you start to really understand and see the power of this particular car that I've bought, the IONIQ 5. And you know, so I'm pretty excited about owning the car. I have my eye on a number of different cars. The GV60, my wife really wants to get. It's not going to be as it's not going to really add anything. I think that thing's got 21-inch wheels because it's the performance model, and that the performance model is kind of an interesting one because she wants the Napa leather, and you can only get that on the performance model, which does 4 seconds 0 to 60, and it's got 489 horsepower when you hit that boost mode. So yeah, I'd like to get it, and I actually did hear from them. I am in the priority one a distribution list for one of the first people to get their cars. They just did a delivery, I think last week, to some woman out in California. So good luck with your car. But in any event, I don't want to pay a penny over sticker MSRP for that car. And I don't know what's going to happen, but if the dealerships are going to charge over MSRP for the car, I'm not buying it. That's my own prerogative. They have every right to charge over MSRP, but I'm not going to do it. Why? Because that GV60, just to give you an idea, that thing's $70,000 with the destination, and with the color paint that we want to get. And I mean, if they're going to add 10 grand on top of that, now you're talking about $80,000 for basically an EGMP platform. Now, I know they got a better front motor. They got a lot of stuff. They have that crystal magic ball that's like freaking people out, including my wife, which I wish they hadn't made that stupid crystal ball. But I mean, look, it is a beautiful car, but is it an $80,000 car? I mean, look, my wife's driving a Macan right now, base. We could sell that for a profit. We've had it for a year, put 14,000 miles on it. And the Macan EV is going to start at 80 grand. And you know, that could be an interesting one. But I also have an order in for a Lucid Air Pure, which they just had a price increase on those for 10 grand on the base models. So, you know, 77,400 plus, I want to get the silver paint, that's $1,000. So 78,400. It may sound like a lot of money for a car, but you know, again, in all three of these, you'll get the $7,500 federal tax credit. At least I'll be able to take advantage of that. But I can't imagine spending 70,000 plus another 10 on a GV60 versus getting a Lucid. Now think about it. The Lucid, I don't love the look of it. I wish it was a little bit sportier. I wish it was an SUV. I wish it was the Gravity, right? But you cannot argue with the statistics and the technology that's in this car. I mean, this thing is a 403-mile range. Again, which is better, range or charging speed? The answer is yes. Okay, range, charging speed equals, right, the best of those worlds equals Lucid. It also equals the Tesla, the Model S, of course, as well, and the 3s. But again, I want to stay away from those cars for the time being. I want to play in the CCS space for now. But this Lucid's got 406 miles of range, EPA rated range. I know when Tom did the over at State of Charge, when he did the 70-mile-an-hour test, got 500 miles. Now that was on the bigger one, which we're not going to get, but still 400 and something plus horsepower, 0 to 60 in 4 seconds. This is the base model Lucid. It's got battery preconditioning, on-route planning, plug and charge, and 3 free years of EA. So if these Genesis dealers are going to charge 10 grand over for a GV60, and that thing's 80 grand, and I can get a Lucid Air Pure for 77.4, I don't know. That's going to be an interesting trade right there. But in any event, I'm hoping that some of this data is helpful to you in terms of looking at this, in terms of the times of seconds. This was a funny one over here. You'll see the ice machine down in Darlington, South Carolina. Look at this. This is without a doubt the worst charging session I've ever had. Someone mentioned to me that you can actually put your level 110 charging adapter at different speeds. I know that, and I deliberately kept it at the lowest speed because I didn't want to trip whatever, the circuit breaker on the ice machine. But I took 1.5 kilowatt hours. I was pulling into the car. It said 1.4 kilowatts is what it was pulling, but based on the OBD2 port, the VP scanner that I use with my car scanner app, I was pulling less than putting into the battery pack, I was putting less than 1 kilowatt speed. It was actually 0.9 kilowatts. So 5,460 seconds. It was an hour and 31 minutes, and I pulled 1.5 kilowatts. So that OOS, the out of spec session efficiency factor, you win right there, Mr. Ice Machine, outside of Florence in Darlington. And then again, just going back to the best charging session that I had, and I think I even referenced that in the video, was this Stafford, Virginia, 10 to 84%. I hit spot on 10 to 80% in 18 minutes. I think it might have even been 17 minutes. And so awesome charging session there, which has been replicated a number of different times as I've charged. So listen, guys, guys and gals, I hope that you find this sort of video helpful. I wanted to share with you the differences between these two cars. Again, it's not just about looks today. It's about technology and what it is when you're buying one of these cars today. You have to look at your use case. And if you're going to get an electric vehicle and have it be a second car that you're never going to road trip, then great. You know what? You don't need to have an 800 volt, super high fast, 270 kilowatt charging Taycan, or a 309 kilowatt charging Lucid Air, or even an EGMP platform. The ID.4s are fine. Even the Mach-E's, they don't charge super fast. They're fine. They are slow charging. For those of you that are interested in a fun video on Out of Spec Motoring, Kyle did this race to Vegas. And what was interesting, there were 5 vehicles. There was a Taycan, there was an IONIQ 5, it was an SEL, I believe, 19-inch wheels, mine has 20-inch wheels, which is the limited. The ID.4, again, just 19-inch wheels. And then there was a Model X, and then a Model 3, and then a Mach-E. And the Taycan came, well, the idea of the race was to go from Fort Collins, Colorado to Vegas, and whoever won the race, they got the master bedroom in the Airbnb. I thought that was beautiful, but you could not go more than 5 miles an hour over the speed limit. So this was to test out the charging network that's out there. And while a lot of people will complain about EA not having, as many charging stations as Tesla does, and no doubt they don't, what's interesting is across the country, assuming you can get to one of these 350s, there are way more high-speed chargers in the EA network on certain stretches of the roads than there are V3s with Tesla. And when you combine that fact with the Tesla V3s that are 250s, they tend to taper faster than a lot of these higher powered cars like the Taycans and the Lucids and the EGMPs. They go deeper into the pack for a lot longer. You know what? Taycan won. IONIQ 5 came in second, even though they made some, Zach and they didn't do as great a job in terms of charging that car as they could have, but they still came in second before the Model X and before the Model 3, and the Mach-E came in last. But it just goes to show you that I love Tesla. I love their supercharging network. But there's so much fun going on outside of Tesla, guys, and we're living it right now. So I encourage you to get out there, do your homework, contact me, contact us if you have any questions, or comment below about your thoughts about this type of video. I just kind of, like I said before, I wanted to share my thoughts on this. please go over to Out of Spec Motoring if you get a chance and watch my latest video from Florida back up to Connecticut, and perhaps the one from Connecticut down to Florida. I had a lot of fun making those videos. I've never done it before. I learned how to edit using Final Cut myself. I'm kind of proud of that. And if any of you found some value in it, I just want to, thank you for all of your positive comments. I'm really enjoying this. So in any event, you have a very good day, rest of your day. And thank you for watching another episode of Out of Spec Reviews.